Major Otto Kruger braces against the thunder of his Panzer's cannon. At 600 meters, he sights a Soviet T-34, sleek and angled, crawling through the morning mist. He shouts, "Fewer!" The 75mm shell roars out, hits dead center and ricochets like a pebble against stone. Sparks shower, steel clangs, the crew blinks in disbelief. Kruger's loader, Unteroffizier Becker, yells, "Hit!" It should be burning, but the T-34 drives on, engine snarling. Another shell impact, no effect. The Soviet tank's turret swings slow, deliberate toward Kruger's position. For the first time, he tastes real fear. Radio chatter erupts. Oberscharführer Merbius, 2 vehicles down. Negative effect requesting guidance. Becker jams another shell. Kruger fires, again and again. 3 more impacts, all futile. Now 5 T-34s crest the ridge, their hulls almost glowing in the early sun. German crews scramble fumbling, swearing, some already reversing at desperate speed. 2 Tigers open fire. One jams, the other stalls on a deep rut. Soviets advance unbroken, driving straight through the battered German line. Within minutes, 4 Panzers are left burning, crews fleeing into the wheat. Across this 9-kilometer front, 23 German tank commanders radio in the same impossible report. Enemy armor repelling all fire. It's not just Kruger. Fields erupt with smoke and confusion. Where hours earlier there was ironclad confidence, now panic spreads. The Soviets keep coming, hundreds more shapes materializing from camouflage. But 72 hours earlier, not a single German officer believed this could possibly happen. 72 hours earlier, the mood in Army Group South's headquarters is electric and arrogant. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein addresses his senior commanders. The Russians are spent. Their armor reserves are exhausted, their lines brittle. Intelligence reports echo this. A Panzer colonel jokes, "We will need brooms, not shells, to clear this sector." Operation Citadel is seen as the war-winning stroke. German confidence is rooted in past victories and the devastating performance of their new Panthers and Tigers. No one believes the Soviets could possibly mount a real armored resistance, let alone a decisive one. But beneath the surface, critical gaps fester. Luftwaffe reconnaissance misreads camouflaged Soviet tank parks as empty fields. Signals intercepts suggest only Shadow's phantom divisions, rumors. In late June, a German intelligence officer warns, reports of fresh T-34s are Soviet deception. No one listens. Stalin's ghost army, multiple tank armies concealed in forests and valleys, remains invisible to their eyes. The Germans calculate 1,500 enemy tanks at most, distributed thinly across the Kursk salient. They see only what they expect to see. Behind Soviet lines, General Rotmistrov's 5th Guards tank army sits silent, waiting for the order. Engineers dig in, crews rest in shallow foxholes beside their machines. Camo netting masks everything from the air. The Germans edge closer, their columns massing. On July 5th, before dawn, 2,700 German tanks surge forward, convinced they'll crush the Red Army in a single blow. At 04:12 hours, they would discover the truth. It starts just after 04:10 hours. The first German spearheads reach a patch of low ground near Prokhorovka. In the pre-dawn gloom, shadows move to many shapes to count. Major Kruger's radio fills with static-laced urgency. Movement, 3 o'clock, multiple contacts. He squints through his optics, a flash of running men, then the unmistakable silhouette of T-34 turrets. A Panzer beside him fires, the impact dull thud, no explosion. The advancing line does not halt. Words crackle over headphones. Something isn't right, they're not stopping. Calls for artillery support fill the ether. Other tank commanders like Lieutenant Weber report impossible numbers. Company strength, no battalion strength. They're everywhere. Gun crews work feverishly. Another barrage bounces harmlessly off wave after wave of Soviet tanks. By 430, every German formation on the 9-kilometer front faces the same nightmare enemy armor surging forward, immune to fire. Radios jam with overlapping cries for help. Headquarters demands clarity, but confusion reigns. The chain of command strains as reality overtakes expectation. Command posts scramble to relay new orders. The belief in technological superiority shatters as Tigers break down and Panthers burn. Kruger sees his flank dissolve. Crewmen flee burning vehicles, streamed by the muddy tracks of advancing T-34s. Within the first hour, 147 German tanks are lost or disabled. But this is only the beginning. The next 6 hours will force the Wehrmacht to confront not just the Red Army, but the end of its own doctrine. By 0530 hours, the German front lines around Prokhorovka are in chaos. The 1st SS Panzer Division, having regrouped after its initial shock, attempts a counterattack. Major Kruger, now joined by Oberfuhrer Wittmann in his Tiger, orders a flanking maneuver along the embankment, hoping to cut through the Soviet wedge. Instead, the Germans encounter an oncoming wall of T-34s dozens wide, advancing in tightly packed ranks. Shells ring out, but German gunners watch their rounds spark off Soviet glacis plates. Within minutes, the meadow becomes a graveyard of burning armor, smoke rolling over churned mud. German infantry, caught between the tanks and a rising tide of Soviet motorized riflemen, begin to withdraw in small, panicked groups. On the Soviet side, the advance is equally harrowing. Inside his tank, Lieutenant Ivanov feels thunder coursing through the hull as shell after shell hammers their formation. Visibility drops as white phosphorus and smoke shells detonate all around. Ivanov's radio blares contradictory orders. Push forward, hold the line, protect the right flank. Cholera of orders and the screams of wounded crews fill the net. The tankers fight their own sense of dread, seeing comrades' T-34s torn open by lucky shots or immobilized by mines. Still, the mass attacks continue, propelled by prearranged signals red flags, green flares maintaining relentless forward motion. Shortly after 0700 hours, the turning point arrives. Soviet tanks, backed by a fresh wave from the 29th Tank Corps, break through the last coherent German defensive ridge. The Germans, their panzers crippled or immobilized in bottlenecks, can no longer form effective firing lines. Out of 420 German tanks committed in this sector, over 180 are already knocked out or abandoned. Reports estimate more than 260 Soviet tanks lost, but the Red Army presses on, grinding forward using sheer numbers. Abandoned German positions dot the landscape, marked by smoldering hulls and scattered equipment. At headquarters, General Hoth receives fragmented reports. Front breached, tank losses catastrophic, infantry in disarray. Desperate, he authorizes a general withdrawal on the left sector at 735 while ordering reserve battalions to counterattack on the right. Messages are relayed by radio and runner. Confusion ensures some units never receive orders. Staff officers scramble to collate the true scale of disaster, while the frontline dissolves by the hour. On a technical level, the German defeat stemmed from a critical mismatch between expectation and reality. The Panther's 75mm KW K-42 gun, designed for 138mm penetration at 1,000 meters, should have outclassed the T-34's sloped 45mm frontal armor. German doctrine and tank gunnery handbooks predicted a single well-aimed shot would suffice to destroy Soviet armor. But Red Army engineers had recently up-armored the T-34s, increasing effective thickness to nearly 60mm and applying new heat-treated alloys. Against this unexpected fortification, even the vaunted 88mm Tiger guns struggled at shallow angles or longer ranges. German ammunition, still using spring 1943 batches, proved brittle, often shattering rather than penetrating. Field tests had failed to account for the survivability upgrades implemented just weeks prior. Strategically, the Germans' reliance on previous battle patterns was fatal. Commanders like Manstein and Hauser believed Soviet counterattacks would come piecemeal, as at Kharkov or Crimea, making deep armored thrusts feasible. At Kursk, Soviet Marshal Zhukov instead massed entire tank armies in depth, with carefully camouflaged pre-assault positions. Red Army doctrine called for simultaneous, large-scale advances, using sheer volume to absorb expected losses. German forces, overconfident and focused on technological overmatch, advanced into a deliberately prepared kill zone. Unlike in France in 1940 or at Stalingrad in 1942, here they faced coordinated counterattacks from well-rested, protected, and numerically superior foes. The precise scenario their armored doctrine was least prepared for. Captured orders from the 5th Guards Tank Army reveal the emphasis on aggressive shock action, regardless of initial loss rates. Advance at all costs. Loss of vehicle is not a reason to halt. Post-war interrogations of German officers note their disbelief. Oberstleutnant Dörler recalls, "We struck them dozens of times. Their tanks kept moving." After-action reports document that in the breakthrough sector, the Soviets lost more than 40% of committed armor, but achieved a penetration 3 kilometers deep. By contrast, German losses amounted to 55% of armored strength in the same area, a reversal not seen previously on the Eastern Front. By midday on July 5th, the surviving elements of the 1st and 2nd SS Panzer divisions retreat 2 kilometers west, hastily digging in along emergency secondary lines. Over 6,000 men are repositioned in less than 3 hours, with orders to prioritize anti-tank gun fields and fallback demolition points. Field hospitals overflow as medics sort the wounded in makeshift triage tents behind the new line. German artillery units receive direct orders to lay suppression fire on any road used by advancing Soviet armor. News of the sector collapse reaches Army Group South headquarters by 1300 hours. Field Marshal Manstein, initially skeptical, demands confirmation before finally ordering a halt to all offensive movements west of Prokhorovka by 1430. Radio silence falls over some companies. Others receive garbled directions. Aides compile casualty rosters as staff cars shuttle urgent updates. Within hours, OKH, Army High Command, circulates a classified directive. No units are to attempt deep advances without explicit permission, and Panzer reserves are to redeploy south. The toll is staggering. By nightfall, German armored forces in the breach sector are reduced to just 90 operational tanks out of an initial 420. Soviet units, though battered, control all ground east of the river and the heights overlooking Prokhorovka station. Over 1,100 Soviet and 510 German armored vehicles are confirmed destroyed or disabled by July 6th. The failure to achieve a breakthrough at Kursk delays the German summer campaign and forces a strategic defensive for the rest of 1943. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Fact 1, personal account among newly released materials, the diary of Jeffreiter Helmut Kastner, a 20-year-old loader in the 3rd SS Panzer Regiment, offers vivid frontline insight. On July 5th, he scrawled, "Shell after shell none bite. We are not fighting tanks, but demons." Kastner described panic as his Panthers' rounds sparked off T-34s. His account, found decades later hidden in a post-war family archive, reveals the psychological unraveling experienced by ordinary crews, something sanitized after the war. This raw testimony contradicted official reports that played down the confusion and fear pervasive among German soldiers during the encounter at Prokhorovka. Fact 2. Logistical reality captured supply ledgers from Panzergruppe Süd document that, by offensive launch, only 2,200 high-velocity armor-piercing rounds were available per 1,000 tanks, far short of the 3,500 claimed by quartermaster reports to higher command. This understocking forced gunners to conserve fire or use inferior munitions. In the first day's melee, units ran dry in hours, resorting to repurposed high-explosive shells. The acute shortage hampered German firepower right as crews realized their standard rounds were ineffective, magnifying tactical disarray and contributing to higher-than-anticipated losses in armor duels. Fact 3. Official versus actual records. Panzer Corps Command filed an after-action report stating that only light and temporary immobilizations affected German vehicles. However, Soviet salvage teams recovered over 170 abandoned or burned Panzers, not including those towed away. Soviet unit diaries and photographic evidence captured by war correspondents document these numbers. The underreporting stemmed from a mixture of morale concerns and deliberate falsification, a pattern later verified by post-war investigations comparing both sides' records. Fact 4. Ground-level reality. Soldiers confronted chaos the high command never anticipated. Eyewitness after eyewitness recalls tanks bogged in deep irrigation ditches, crews forced to dismount and fight as infantry. Improvised tactics using smoke canisters to cover retreat or scavenging fuel from destroyed vehicles emerged spontaneously across the sector. Corps-level diaries now show this improvisation was the rule, not the exception, challenging the myth of German battlefield discipline. Fact 5. Environmental factor. Meteorological logs from July 1943 register heavy dew and intermittent rain the night before battle. The fields around Prokhorovka became seas of mud, reducing Panther and Tiger mobility and causing mechanical failures. Soviet T-34s with wider tracks outperformed their adversaries across the sodden terrain. This environmental edge was largely unanticipated in German operational planning and compounded mechanized losses as panzers slipped or stalled under fire. In the immediate decades following the battle, Western and Soviet historians alike drew on official military accounts and prisoner interrogations. Early literature, penned in the 1950s-1960s, echoed the claims of decisive German tank superiority and portrayed Prokhorovka as a defensive Soviet sacrifice. Most relied on censored Wehrmacht reports, incomplete Red Army narratives, and Allied intelligence overviews documents that emphasized numbers over tactics and victories over losses. The prevailing belief was that technological factors alone determined the outcome, and the scale of German setbacks remained understated. From the 1970s onward, classifications relaxed and a broader swath of source material emerged. Soviet archives opened cautiously, revealing operational diaries and loss records, while German veterans made unpublished journals and private photographs available to researchers. The emergence of Soviet unit logs, supply manifests, and German workshop records appended established figures for losses and exposed the gap between official reports and the chaos at ground level. These materials demonstrated a dynamic, close-quarters melee and illuminated Soviet tactical innovations previously under-acknowledged, such as massed, multi-corps coordinated assaults. Today, most scholars agree Prokhorovka was less a one-sided massacre than a brutally even contest, marked by horrific losses on both sides and shattered mythologies. Consensus now holds that German technical strengths were offset by logistical constraints, environmental miscalculation, and Soviet operational depth. Remaining debates focus on the exact number of tanks destroyed and the real intent of Soviet command, whether they sought a breakthrough or accepted a deliberate war of attrition. Ongoing digitization of Soviet and German division logs continues to refine, but so far, no single narrative prevails without contention. Individual 1. Primary focus on Unteroffizier Wilhelm Vogel, gunner, 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte. Age 22, born in Bremen, worked as a machinist before conscription. On July 5th, Vogel's tank was hit and disabled in the first Soviet wave. Sheltering beneath his wrecked Panther, he witnessed advancing T-34s overrunning the position, writing later. The ground shook so hard I could hear mortar fragments rain against my helmet, but the tanks kept coming unstoppable, faceless. After spending 3 days evading capture, he was wounded by shrapnel and evacuated. Vogel survived the war, returned to Bremen, and spent decades as a railroad worker, quietly battling nightmares and survivor's guilt. His oral account, recorded in the 1980s and archived at the German Federal Archives, offers rare clarity on the battle's human toll. Individual 2, Enemy Perspective Junior Lieutenant Alexei Tarasov, 29th Tank Corps 24 from Smolensk, had little tank experience before Kursk. His T-34 was hit twice but did not penetrate. Tarasov described the Soviet advance. We could see flames everywhere, but the order was to drive forward no matter what. He survived with minor injuries and later coached tank crews, dying in the late 1990s. His recollections, housed in the Russian State War Archive, mirror German confusion and stress relentless momentum, not tactical finesse. Individual 3, long-term impact Frau Ilse Bauer, widow of a missing Panzer commander, embodies the aftermath's enduring impact. After her husband's disappearance at Prokhorovka, she struggled to gain official recognition for his presumed death. Bauer's search for closure, a decade-long ordeal marked by correspondence with Red Cross and German authorities, was typical of thousands. Public pressure from families like hers forced post-war German policy to expand pension and support frameworks, setting precedent for future war casualty treatment. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of documented cases, revealed patterns that shaped strategic decisions throughout the campaign. Within just 6 hours of the German assault at Prokhorovka, a catastrophic collapse rippled across the front. Orders for immediate withdrawal were issued at 07:35 hours, pulling the battered remnants of the 1st and 2nd SS Panzer Divisions west. More than 6,000 men, many wounded, were redeployed in under 3 hours. To stem the breach, anti-tank gun fields were hurriedly established and supplementary artillery units funneled south. Operational Panzer strength plummeted from 420 to under 90 vehicles by nightfall, while field hospitals strained with casualties surpassing 1,000 men. German command abruptly transitioned from offense to a desperate defensive posture. Days later, the short-term consequences crystallized. German offensive operations were suspended along the entire southern salient, as reserves, originally slated for exploitation, were redirected to plug the widening gap. The halt forced Manstein's staff to abandon Citadel's timetable, eliminating any prospect of a decisive breakthrough and leading to subsequent supply shortages at key nodes. Casualty projections were shattered. German planners expected 500–700 lost vehicles across the summer campaign. But within days, more than 500 Panzers were out of action in the Prokhorovka sector alone. Soviet losses were immense but rapidly replenished, maintaining offensive pressure. In the weeks and months that followed, the medium-term impact became undeniable. The failure at Prokhorovka delayed further German operations by up to 2 months. Soviet forces exploited the pause, retaking lost ground and expanding bridgeheads that threatened the Axis southern flank. Command reshuffles ensued. Several corps and divisional commanders were relieved or reassigned, while junior Soviet officers received field promotions for demonstrated initiative. The Red Army's 5th Guards, Tank Army, and supporting units consolidated territorial gains, securing strategic positions across the heights east of the river. Long-term, the effects radiated throughout the Eastern Front and beyond. The blunted offensive at Kursk marked the Wehrmacht's last large-scale armored initiative in the east, shifting the strategic balance. By year's end, Soviet advances averaged 200–300 kilometers in liberated territory. German armored reserves, bled white at Prokhorovka, could not be rebuilt in time for subsequent theaters. This collapse forced new strategies. Germany shifted to static defense, while the Soviets gained freedom to plan major operations, including Bagration in 1944, aided by now unopposed armored formations. Had the battle at Prokhorovka not unfolded, as it did if German Panthers and Tigers had penetrated Soviet armor, as expected, the entire timetable for Operation Citadel would have shifted. Instead of a sector-wide withdrawal, the Germans could have exploited openings east of Prokhorovka, encircling substantial Soviet forces and threatening Kursk city from the south. Soviet units, stripped of armored reserves, would have been forced into a piecemeal retreat across the salient, opening the central front to renewed Axis assaults. Projected losses for the Soviets could have soared to over 2,000 tanks and 15,000 men in the first week, while German panzer groups might have lost fewer than 150 vehicles, reversing the historical outcome and likely prolonging the war in the east by several months. When compared to other high-stakes engagements, Normandy, El Alamein, Stalingrad, Prokhorovka's scale and intensity stand out. Over 1,900 tanks clashed on a front just 9 kilometers wide, making it one of the largest armored encounters in history. In terms of duration and loss rates, it rivals Stalingrad's urban struggle and El Alamein's attritional battles. But what sets it apart is the speed at which the technological and doctrinal paradigms shifted. Modern military academies highlight Prokhorovka not just for its massed armor, but as a classic case study in intelligence failure, logistics under strain, and the violent collision of rival doctrines in a compressed timeframe. Historians today largely concur that Prokhorovka was a pivotal moment. It exposed the limitations of German technical supremacy and forced a doctrinal realignment. Broad consensus exists regarding the scale of losses and the collapse of German initiative. Still debated, however, are the strategic intent behind Soviet attacks and the precise degree of German operational breakdown. Recent archival research continues to refine but not overturn the judgment that Prokhorovka altered the course of the war on the Eastern Front. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Vogel, the young panzer gunner whose Panther was destroyed in the opening Soviet wave, survived after days trapped behind enemy lines. After the war, he returned to Bremen, dedicating his life to his family and the German railways. In an oral history recorded decades later, Vogel remembered, "The ground shook so hard I could hear mortar fragments rain against my helmet, but the tanks kept coming unstoppable, faceless." His testimony, preserved in the German Federal Archives, remains a touchstone for historians seeking the lived truth behind the mythology. Institutional memory of Prokhorovka is deeply embedded in both Russia and Germany. The Prokhorovka Memorial Complex, unveiled in 1995 on the battle site, features towering tank sculptures and commemorative walls listing division insignia. Every July, veterans' families and officials gather for ceremonies, wreath-laying, and moments of silence. The battle's lessons reshaped military education. The Bundeswehr's armored warfare syllabus and Russia's Frunze Academy adopted Prokhorovka case studies by 1973, emphasizing combined arms integration and logistical resilience. Doctrinal revisions followed. In 1944, German and Soviet manuals both revised armor tactics to account for evolving battlefield realities unveiled during this clash. Modern military organizations still apply the lessons of Prokhorovka. NATO and Russian defense planners analyze its engagement cycles, underscoring the necessity of supply chain adaptation, camouflage counterintelligence, and rapid force concentration. The legacy also traces a technical lineage. Today's composite armor, active protection systems, and distributed command networks can be linked back to innovations urged on by the shortcomings witnessed on those muddy fields. Recent operations in Eastern Europe and Central Asia routinely reference tactical paradigms first tested and often broken at Prokhorovka.